There we go. We have our audience now in the room. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. We're just waiting for our moderator to get back on screen, and we will start in just a moment. Okay. Just a little minor technical difficulty, and Emmy should be on in just 1 second. My apologies for the delay. Oh, I think we may have her. Nope, I don't see her. Okay. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start with introductions. And hopefully by the time I finish that, we'll have the technical difficulty with Emmy taken care of. So good evening and welcome, everybody. I am Sylvia Gazarian. I'm Executive Director of the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project, or WRRAP for short. We are thrilled to be live with 4 powerhouses tonight, authors Kathryn Kitty Kolbert and Julia F. Kay, We'll have a deep conversation about their book, Controlling Women, What We Must Do Now to Save Reproductive Freedom. We are also fortunate to have our conversation moderated by the incredible CEO of the Women's March Foundation, Emiliana Guereca, whose superpower is empowering women to fight back. Emmy is a passionate activist and feminist experienced in advocating for women's rights, Latin education, and gender equity on the local and national level. She has a proven history of leading business development from the ground up and mobilizing teams, partners, and stakeholders around a common vision and goal. During today's conversation, you will also have an opportunity to ask questions by putting those in the Q&A feature at the right of your screen. Sandra Fluke, and another amazing powerhouse who for over 2 decades has devoted her career to legislation and legal advocacy for the public interest, will be leading our Q&A discussion. WRRAP is fortunate to have her serve as a director on our board. We apologize in advance if we run out of time for all questions. WRRAP, the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project, established in 1991 and headquartered in Los Angeles, is the only independent 501c3 abortion fund that provides urgently needed financial assistance on a national level to those seeking abortion or emergency contraception. The surge of anti-abortion legislation during COVID and the Delta variant has triggered more insurmountable financial barriers for thousands of individuals needing these medical services. This year, WRRAP celebrates our 30th year anniversary, and our founder and president, Joyce Shore, is still actively involved in our mission to ensure that financially needy individuals of all ages, ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, gender identities, and sexual orientations can access abortion care and emergency contraception. It is because of Joyce's vision that WRRAP was built for this moment, to be able to provide abortion funding in all 50 states, and we are truly grateful for her vision in being prepared for one of the worst years in the history of abortion justice. Thank you, Joyce, for building this fund from the ground up to serve clinics and their patients in all states, and for your lifetime of service to this movement. You are the ultimate powerhouse for abortion funding and justice. Before we begin, we also do want to thank you. We're so grateful to all of our loyal sponsors, including our presenting sponsor for this event, the California Wellness Foundation, and all of our other title sponsors who you had a chance to view during your time in the waiting room. In addition, we truly appreciate the support of our donors, advocates, board, and volunteers who stand with us each day in our fight for reproductive freedom. I also have to take a minute and acknowledge WRRAP's fundraising committee. Carol Dubron-Whitland, Joyce Shore, Susan Shu, Paxton Smith, and Jocelyn Tatel, who worked with me to put on this timely and important event this evening. And I cannot forget to thank Kim Sen, our webinar guru, who is managing all the behind the scenes for us this evening. Know that proceeds from this event will go to our Kira Fund. Andrea Jepson, Kira's mom, is heartened that her daughter's legacy lives on in perpetuity with WRRAP. To date, this event has raised close to $40,000 for the Kira Fund that will be used to support abortion funding at independent clinics across the U.S. Thank you again to each of you for all that you do to help WRRAP meet the needs of so many individuals who need abortion care, especially now. We could not do any of this without you. Reproductive freedom has never been in more dire straits. Roe v. Wade protected abortion rights, and Planned Parenthood versus Casey unexpectedly preserved them. Yet in the following decades, these rights have been gutted by restrictive state legislation, the appointment of hundreds of anti-abortion judges, and violence against abortion providers. Today, the ultra-conservative majority at the Supreme Court has activists, medical providers, abortion funders like us, and everyday individuals worried that we are about to lose our most fundamental reproductive protection. Legal titans Kathryn Kolbert and Julie F.K. share the story of one of the most divisive issues in American politics through their behind-the-scenes personal narratives of stunning losses, hard-earned victories, and moving accounts of women and healthcare providers over 5 decades of legal battles. At this make-or-break moment for legal abortion, new strategies inspired by medical advances, state-level protections, human rights models, and activists around the globe whose courage and determination are making a difference. On behalf of WRRAP, please join me in welcoming Kathryn, Julie, Emmy, and Sandra. And we have Emmy at this point. Uh-oh. Let me see here.
Well, Sylvia, I am so anxious to get to questions that I can start there if you want, because I'm excited about this conversation with Kathryn and Julie. Thank you again, both for joining us, and thank you for writing what I think is a really important book at a really important moment. You guys have yours nicely displayed in the background, and I'm just going to wave mine around like a mad woman who's really concerned about abortion rights right now. So let me just ask, Julie, can we start with you? You know, the book is called Controlling Women. Can you tell us why? Why are you trying to control women? And you know, why does abortion matter so much to so many right now? Tell us about what motivated you on this.
Well, first of all, thank you, Sandra, and we're delighted to be here. And any kind of tech gremlins aside, we are thrilled to be in conversation and look forward to talking with Emmy too, but happy to kick off and are so impressed by the work that WRRAP is doing. And nobody has asked why I try to control women. I do try to control the ones in my family, the girls and women, but it doesn't work well. But the book is really named that because at the heart of the abortion debate, it's not about religious values. It's not about deep philosophical questions about when life begins. It's really about who gets to make these fundamental decisions in our lives about whether and when and with whom and if to have children and start a family, and how to do so in safety and with security that it really takes for families to thrive. And so a lot of what we talk about in the book is really how underlying this debate is an attempt to enforce traditional gender norms where women are seen as child bearers and caretakers, and men are seen as breadwinners. There's very set roles for both genders with no idea of what happens to folks who are non-binary or in non-traditional, so to speak, families. And so we really want to highlight them. We want to highlight why these are fundamental rights that people care about, and about controlling their own lives and making the decisions that fit best for them at different points in their lives.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, because I think it's so crucial for us to understand that and to think about how reproductive health care and reproductive access and rights and reproductive justice have such far-reaching implications in our lives. For folks who are childbearing in particular, it touches everything. And I will tell you that one of the people who understands this better than anyone is Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Some of you may remember a few years back, I was doing advocacy around birth control access. And one of the first things she said to me was, I told them this wasn't about abortion. They were going to come for birth control. This is about controlling women. I'm paraphrasing, but like, she gets it. She knows what this fight is about. So speaking of the fight, Kathryn, Kitty, you actually mentioned that there might be a path around the Supreme Court on this, and a path forward, a way forward despite the Supreme Court. Can you talk about some of the, some of the political initiatives, some of the policy options, like where can we go forward? Give us some hope here.
Well, Sandra, let me give you the bad news first, because I think we do need to address the hope here. But the bad news, I want to make sure everybody understands what a dire circumstance we are now in. It is our view that within the next year, probably sometime in June of 2022, or maybe sooner, the Supreme Court of the United States will eviscerate Roe and, my case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And they will do so by giving states the authority to ban abortion. Today, despite the really horrendous restrictions that are in effect in many states, we still have the right to legalized abortion up until viability in 49 of the 50 states, Texas being the exception to that because of the recent Texas law. But the reality is that the court will, in our view, totally change the standard and allow states to again ban abortion, much like they did in the days before Roe. And that will mean that in as many as 20 states or more, we're likely to see bans on abortion. And most of those states are contiguous to each other. So it would go from about Georgia to Texas, and it'll go from North Dakota down to Arizona. And it will mean that women will be forced to travel or to use other illicit means to have a medication abortion.
We see that just on a daily basis at WRRAP with the calls that we get on the hotline, because so many women are needing to use whatever funds they have and have saved up for even just a portion of that travel, let alone being able to afford the procedure. And this has obviously become just, crisis points since Texas passed their legislation. But please go on.
So the good news is that unlike the days before Roe, when women had to resort to back alley surgical abortions or carry their pregnancies to term against their will, today we do have the availability of medication abortion, which means that women can take 2 pills in a dedicated protocol up until about 11 to 12 weeks of pregnancy, and therefore it will be much safer for women living in the states where abortion is banned. But, and this is where WRRAP comes in and why I'm so thankful to all of you for supporting the work that they do, it's really, really important that we focus on how we can change the circumstances, not for the women in states where abortion is banned, by helping them, and then changing the politics of this issue all across the country. And to me, that's the most important thing. We need to regain political power so that we can ensure that all of the blue states pass laws that protect women, that the purple states become blue, and the red states, we begin to put barriers in place so that they can no longer wreak havoc as they are now doing or are likely to do.
Absolutely.
Sandra, can I just kind of reiterate something that Kitty was saying about that the Supreme Court is really not our friends. They're not going to save us on this. I think we've known that or suspected it for a while, but I'm an optimist, but I think, it would have to be delusional to be optimistic about the Supreme Court. I mean, as Kitty, said long ago, that everything you needed to know about the Supreme Court you learned on Sesame Street, that it's all about counting to 5, that it takes 5 justices to make a decision on anything. It's a majority vote. And in this case, the Supreme Court has a very solid 5 justices, thanks to 3 of whom were appointed by Trump, who are solidly anti-abortion. We're a little less certain about Justice Roberts. But if you look back in time at when Roe v. Wade created the right to abortion out of the privacy rights that were already found in the Constitution around contraception, and really allowed abortion up to the point of viability, usually around 24 to 26 weeks. And then after that, if a woman's health or life was at risk. And that was kind of the law of the land for a long time. It was a decision that was based in a privacy right, and it was very much dependent on a woman making a decision with her doctor, who was probably a white guy in a white coat, as the Supreme Court saw it in that day and age. And Justice Blackmun, who wrote the opinion, was the counsel for the Mayo Clinic. This was very much about, not exactly vesting the right into deeply held faith in women, but nonetheless, it was a system that worked. And Kitty's rolling her eyes at this. Oh, no. So,
it was worth an eye roll. I think we all agree.
I'm trying to talk to somebody else. Okay.
In paternalism we trust. So
this is the part where Kitty comes in and saves the day. So I hope she's hearing this loud and clear, that in the Casey decision, she really did pull a rabbit out of the hat. And it was, at one point, the justices early on were going to vote to overturn Roe. Justice Kennedy had a change of heart, and Casey has been the law of the land for a while now, of allowing the core holdings of Roe, but permitting states to place what's called an undue burden on access to abortion. And that's why groups like WRRAP, clinics, and others really struggle to provide services to so many marginalized women already today, because there are waiting periods, there are additional expenses, there are really a lot of hoops to go through that predominantly affect people who are in rural areas or teens traveling, low-income women, and disproportionately affect women of color. And so this is kind of the land right now, and it's only going to get worse. And I think, I'll let Kitty give some of the background on Texas as well, because I know a lot of people on this call have probably been following it, and it's perplexing and it's frightening what's coming down the road.
Yeah, I think I can add a little bit about the Texas situation. As many of you know, Texas passed this really egregious law. What it does is it bans abortion from about 6 weeks in pregnancy, well before many women know they're even pregnant. And instead of having the state enforce the law, it delegates to any person the right to bring a lawsuit against providers and those who help them. And it gives those vigilantes a bit of an incentive, a $10,000 bounty for bringing those cases. And providers and women who are sued, or others who are sued, don't have the right to even collect their own attorney's fees. So this is an egregious law. But let's be clear here, it's probably a bit of a red herring, in the sense that the Supreme Court is going to hear arguments starting on Monday, November 1st, hear arguments in the case. But the only question that will be currently before the court is whether or not the Justice Department or the providers actually have the authority to sue and bring the question in federal court. And then, as you all know, the Supreme Court refused to grant an injunction against the law, didn't put it on hold when the proceedings were pending. They've twice refused to enjoin the law. And this case that's being heard on Monday will give them a third opportunity to place the law on hold. I don't think there's a chance that's going to happen. They've already voted, twice against it. We're not going to reach in the Texas case the critical question about whether or not Roe and Casey remain the law of the land. But that question will be before the court on December 1st, when arguments are heard in a Mississippi case that bans abortion at 15 weeks of pregnancy. That case will give the court the opportunity to open the door, let the floodgates in, and change the law so that states will then have the authority to ban abortion, or otherwise restrict it in any way it can.
Yes, I think, as you said, Senator Susan Collins might be the only one in America waiting with bated breath to see what happens, because the rest of us, unfortunately, can count and are not fools. But
Sandra, let me just say that a lot of people don't yet believe it. Okay, I can't tell you how often people say to me, "Oh, they can't do that, can they? They're not
Oh,
really
they
going to
can.
do
They can.
right. But I think that it will take them actually undoing and changing the law before the majority of Americans who believe, as we do, that this is an important fundamental human right that ought to be preserved and protected. It's going to take it us losing at the Supreme Court level before most people will believe that it can happen. And unfortunately, we got to start working sooner than that. Okay, we
That's
got to
right.
start working today
That's
to
right.
make changes that are necessary.
And I think California has already been doing a lot of the hard work and leading the way for what we need to see. I mean, we are a very red and blue country at this point. There's a few purple states, but when, it is a question of when Roe is eviscerated, there will be 22 states that are ready to outlaw abortion because the Supreme Court will take away the federal protections and the states can move ahead. So, Kitty and I talk a lot about kind of what are some of the solutions, and I think California has shown some of them, definitely helping women who need to travel and getting patients, people who are looking for abortion services to the places where they can receive them, as well as making medication much more widely available. And one of the favorite laws that we like to point to as an example for the rest of the country is what California did in requiring that state universities, health centers have medication abortion available. I think it sounds like such a no-brainer, but I know it was a lot of work to get there that you all did, and it's something that I think often being the first in that kind of really affirmative initiative shows other states what to do. We'd love to see an even greater expansion so that walk-in clinics, doc in a box, other kinds of urgent care centers that have been so important during the COVID pandemic also play a role in providing medication abortion and possibly even early surgical abortions. And so, the more we can make abortion available in these blue states, the easier it will be for people who are traveling for abortion services, the more it continues to normalize rather than stigmatize abortion services.
Sandra, let's just to give you an example, there are about 800 abortion clinics in this country, but 89% of all counties have no provider. Now,
That's
most
right.
of the people still are going to live in those 15 states where abortion can be legal. But if we were able to broaden who provides abortions, and for example, these minute clinics are basically places doing emergency primary care, had abortion pills, could prescribe abortion pills by telemedicine or any other way, that would dramatically increase both the number of providers and dramatically increase availability of abortion for the women who are having to travel to new states. And frankly, we could do that. I mean, think about this a little bit.
Do that. And at WRRAP, we would love to put ourselves out of business. We would love to get to a point where our financial assistance for folks who are pregnant would not be necessary. You mentioned the shortage of providers in so many countries or so many counties around the country. And I was speaking recently with a champion at Planned Parenthood Los Angeles who pointed out the impact that things like the Texas law, when that gets replicated in many states, are going to have on the number of providers. Because if universities are actually prohibited from training folks in how to provide abortions as part of their medical curriculum, the crisis in providers is just going to escalate, and we already have a crisis.
Although that's the training for surgical abortion. Now, the reality is doctors
a lot of prescription, yes.
Nurses can give prescriptions. All kinds of people can give prescriptions. They don't need specialized training except for on the protocols of doing it. And that's why medication abortion does offer a huge incentive. Let me give you a couple of other ideas that I think we have in the book. There's about, I think we come up with about 58 different policy alternatives. But one of the things that we have talked a lot about is how we increase access to birth control. Clearly, we're already seeing women in Texas requesting the morning after pill at much greater frequencies. They're coming into knowing that abortion is not available and being scared about that. they are seeking help from the morning after pill. But the birth control pill itself, there's lots of barriers to getting it. In most states, you need a prescription. In some of those states, you got to go to a doctor to get that prescription. Sometimes you have to go into the doctor's office. You can't even get it by telemedicine. But there's all
some require exams.
That's right. So there's all kinds of ways we can expand it. But to me, one of the best would be to make the birth control pill over the counter. That's how it is offered in countries all over the world. And there's really no reason, except for the FDA's hesitancy into changing the rule, that couldn't happen. And so we think that's a really important thing to push for. The other thing I was going to say is that I think we ought to think a lot about sex education, making that much more available. I know you all have been following all the controversies about school boards all over the country who are being urged by the right wing to ban books and do all kinds of really horrendous anti-free speech activities. And in my view, we ought to be pushing those school boards and electing those school boards because they have the ability to not only help women and see women as equals, but to make sure that good sex education is available in the schools.
And the debate over sex education just shows us what I think Elise Hogue, the former head of NARAL, has made this point in her books, that when they come for reproductive rights, it's just the first step in what else they come for, right? They fought us on sex education in the schools, and now look at the kind of censorship that we're facing. So it's all incredibly connected.
Winning, the far right has made these winning issues. They are wedge issues. They have launched a battle against trans kids. They have been, aiming at contraception and at abortion for a long time. And I think it is, a domino effect. And that the answer is that it matters where we vote. I mean, a lot of the solutions we're talking about are either state or federal or even local school board. And these elections matter. And, a lot of us need to get a lot more politically active. And I always say to people that when Kitty and I feel like we're preaching to the choir, then we add, bring a friend, join the choir, bring a relative, a daughter, a grandparent, a state legislature, but really getting out and getting really involved in a lot of these different elections all up and down the ballot. In California, your boots on the ground are needed both in your own state and in others. Definitely call a friend in Virginia, and we can all do, in this day and age, you can do texts and postcards and really work to get the vote in other states, because this is a national issue about gender equity and rights, and it's a global human rights issue. So it's one that certainly shouldn't end at our state's borders, but really, electing people who are going to be champions for us and not need to have women start a kind of abortion migration or have people looking for services have to travel and depend on funds. I don't think WRRAP will ever go out of business. I think you'll find other needs and ways to support families, because abortion is a small piece of the puzzle. We've got a horrific maternal mortality rate in this country. It's an embarrassment as an industrialized country, and it's also a real example of race inequity, because Black women and Indigenous women have much higher rates of infant and maternal mortality. So there's a lot of work we can do once we shore up abortion rights in particular, but that we need to remember what the reproductive justice movement has really been at the forefront of pointing out how this is two sides of a coin. It's about access to abortion, but it's also about access to having families and the supports that we all need to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I so appreciate you referencing what we can do here in California, because I think often we as Californians can think that this isn't our fight or there's nothing we can do. And the reality is that we have had some really important steps forward just in recent years, as you were referencing here in California. But there are some more we can do. We're calling on the governor to make California a fully pro-choice state. There are a number of steps that we are hoping he will take. So there's more to come in that respect. And I feel like one of the most important things we can do because regardless of what are other elements of privilege we have as Californians, whether we have a racial privilege like myself or educational or economic privilege, we have geographic privilege. We have the privilege that we live in a blue state. And when Roe unfortunately may fall, it's going to be all about where you live. And we can't allow our privilege to blind us to what's happening in so many places around the country. We've got to be in tune with that and take action in these moments.
Sandra, one of the things that I think I'd like to really emphasize to everybody is that politics has to be at all levels. Too often, liberals are people on our side of this issue.
Oh, we're obsessed with DC. Yes.
Right. We're obsessed with the presidency. Okay. We vote every 4 years, but there's an election every 6 months. Okay. And we vote for the president, but we forget about all those other congressional races, but even more importantly, the state legislative races. Now, I live in Pennsylvania. Okay. We have a pro-choice governor who's about to go out of office, and we've got both houses of the legislature are controlled by Republicans who are anti-choice. We lose the governor's seat, we'll have a ban in Pennsylvania. Even with the governor's seat, we might have a ban in Pennsylvania because they'll put it on the ballot. So we need to think about, and people in California can help us in Pennsylvania make sure that our state legislature flips, make sure we elect a pro-choice governor, and of course the Senate seat, which is so important going forward for in this next election. And that's true in states all over the country. We're seeing it in Virginia right now. We flipped that state 2 years ago, and we might just flip back in a couple of weeks. So I think that focusing on all the levels of government, running great champions, encouraging more women to run for office, that's the job of all of us in every state until as many as we can flip to blue.
And when we do have that political power, that's when it's really important to pass laws like these omnibus laws that really codify Roe v. Wade, or really, put forward in state law proactive protections for abortion rights. Because as we've seen in the past, especially I think 6 years, that things turn on a dime. The politics is not as reliable even as it used to be. So we've looked at a lot of states, Massachusetts and Illinois and other places that have had these bills that really make the protections that are in Roe and that have been whittled away a bit in Casey have much more secure kind of belt and suspenders, anticipating that Roe could fall, and also protecting your state sort of in the future. So to do that, we really do need to elect champions. I mean, not just people who kind of tick the box and say, yes, of course, I'm pro-choice, but really those who understand what reproductive freedom and reproductive justice are. I know WRRAP has worked a lot around overturning the Hyde Amendment at the federal level, and that's the ban on Medicaid funding, federal Medicaid funding, and that has been in place for decades and was always, thought of as, well, it's not so bad, it's just a ban on funding. And a lot of the newer elected women to Congress and led by Black women in Congress and activists in the states have really cried out and pointed to how the racial disparity that comes as a result of that ban on funding has made it a really even more reprehensible ban than it ever was. And it's a ban that's been replicated throughout federal funding for abortion. So if you're in the Peace Corps, if you're in the military, if you're in Veterans Administration, there's no funding for abortion, which means there's essentially no access for people who rely on federal health care benefits for their health care. And so now we're at the point where for the first time in 40 years, the president and President Biden has said that he will not include the Hyde Amendment in his proposed budget. Well, he didn't do that because he felt like this was an issue that moved his heart. If anything, I think, he would crawl under the table and avoid this issue. But there's really been such an outpouring of support for overturning it, and really a rallying cry. And so that's kind of, I think, a nice example of what our power can be, because there is such a majority in this country of people who support abortion rights. We just need to vote like it. We need to really make noise when something's happening, when a bad law is being passed, whether it's in our state or in Texas or somewhere. We need to shine a light on it and start telling people to protest in the streets and boycott states that are trampling all over our rights, and really start taking action.
Yes, absolutely. And, you were mentioning how we need champions, not just folks who are checking the box. We saw the House of Representatives pass the Women's Health Protection Act in the wake of the reaction to the Supreme Court's egregious behavior. But we can't get it through in the Senate. But still, why did it take until now to get it through the House? Representative Judy Chu has been championing that for a long time. So if we can get filibuster reform, that's got to be one of the first things on the agenda. And can you tell us, why would the Women's Health Protection Act give us something different than what we have under these Supreme Court precedents? Why would that be important legislation, and why is that a reason to fight for filibuster reform?
Well, first and foremost, it would restore the rights we enjoyed under Roe as opposed to Casey. So it would really prohibit most states from passing restrictions on abortion unless they had a particularly good reason to do so. And so the standard is more protective. But equally important is that it goes very far to eliminate some of the restrictions that are in current law, and it details very specifically all the types of laws in the states that would be illegal under it. It wouldn't depend on the Supreme Court interpreting what an undue burden means, or what's a helpful. It basically says you can't pass a waiting period, you can't pass a law requiring bias counseling. And lists many of the kinds of restrictions that would be illegal if this law becomes law. Now, filibuster reform, is something that everybody's talking about, but I actually don't see it happening very quickly. And therefore, there's another way around this. What? Well, just replace the 10 Republicans we need so that we have enough votes to overcome a filibuster, no matter what the Republicans throw our way. Now, obviously I'd love filibuster reform because that would make it easier. But, okay, we can elect more Democratic senators, so this is not an issue. And if we had 60, the filibuster's meaningless.
That is absolutely true.
Okay, and that should be our goal, because ultimately, having a supermajority, having the power, regardless of the obstacles the other party puts in our way, is what's really critical. This year we got a good opportunity to pick up a bunch of Senate seats, but it's not going to come without lots and lots and lots of work.
Well, and this is the year to do it because, sorry, I'll get you in just 1 second, Julie. This is the year to do it because 2024 is going to be rough in terms of the Senate map. I'll say I work on filibuster in my day job, and I've got some good solid hope. So I encourage everyone to call their senators and ask for reform on that right now. But Julie, I know you wanted to add something, but I also wanted to ask, well, what about Supreme Court expansion, court reform that folks say is the answer here?
It's too long-term a solution, and it's not, I think, not a winnable enough fight. I take a great deal of heart in the fact that you're working on filibuster reform. I think that's a tough one. I think Supreme Court reform is even a much longer goal. And I want to say earlier that this is a winnable issue, and we need to make it so. And I think I would be completely remiss if I didn't take a brief moment to just say how fabulous we thought Paxton Smith's valedictorian speech was in Texas. And
yes.
I don't know if she's listening, but somebody should tell her. If not, Kitty and I think we probably haven't watched it as much as her family has, but that kind of just moment of, speaking truth and really having the courage to stand up was amazing. I mean, I can just see, even in my head, see the echoing through and across the football field of her clear words. And I think when we see something like that, and especially from somebody who, grew up with abortion rights being legal and is thinking about her future and what that change means to her and to her generation and to other people who may or may not ever need abortion services, but need to know what message it sends when we are criminalizing that conduct, when we are placing it out of reach, when we are stigmatizing it. And so I think there are moments that really inspire me. That was one that I think just inspired so many of us. And, when we think about what can we do, a lot of people have really busy lives. And so it's finding and carving out ways and parts of your day to really stand up and have some engagement with this in the politics, in the mass movements, in the marches in our streets, in writing letters and postcards, but also, we're going to have to help some people who are seeking illegal abortion services and access to medication as well. And that may not be the thing for everybody. And it's hard for me to say that as a lawyer, but, especially one that grew up when abortion was always legal. But I spent a lot of time in Ireland when abortion was completely banned and women were traveling, and it's a very different situation. And I think traveling is very burdensome, even with assistance. And as we all know, it's not the healthiest solution. And for some women and some people looking for abortion services, it's not going to be an option at all. So it's definitely an all hands on deck moment.
It absolutely is. And Paxton is a very credible and effective, talented set of hands. For those of you who don't know, Paxton is a member of our board here at WRRAP. And we are so thrilled to have her leadership. And we're not all going to sound as eloquent as she did when we did it or when we do it. But I think the most effective thing we can do to advance reproductive justice is to talk about personal experiences and to talk about it to our friends and family, to people we know, because that allows us to tear down that stereotype, that idea of what someone who has an abortion or who needs reproductive health care looks like, and to realize, oh, that's my sister or my mother or my friend. And that is, if we think back, that is how the gay rights movement turned this country around, is by the political act of coming out. And as a movement for reproductive justice, I think we have to think about how can we do that in safe ways as well. Julie?
Right. I agree, but I also think that it's not just there's such a large number of women who have had abortion. 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, depending on the statistics, women have had abortions. But I think it's also talking about it and coming out of why it's important to us as a right, as a fundamental human right, even for those who will never need abortion services, or for our allies, either people who are not of childbearing years or men, and really talking about what this means and what it says about us when we start really taking away bodily integrity and control over our own liberty.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
the one thing I would add to that, Sandra, is to ask all of you to find ways to involve men in this conversation. Unfortunately, abortion has been dubbed the controversial issue. And that means anybody who gets near it doesn't want to touch it. They don't want to get involved. They think it's kind of dirty, or at least will place a stigma on them if they're seen advocating on behalf of this particular right. And I think we give people the option to beg out, and I don't think we can do that any longer.
No, this has got to be all hands on deck. This is everybody's fight.
It's not just a women's issue. It's an issue for all people, and we have to stop letting our partners and our friends off the hook when they want to do something else rather than coming to a march or joining a protest. And the same goes for corporations. I mean, let's be real here. I mean, in response to the abortion issue, it is a pariah in most corporations. But they ought to be saying, we're not going to Texas. We're not
Well,
relocating.
the reality is that it's good corporate stewardship. It's popular for them to be on our side of this. And you're right about, broadening this issue to not being just a women's issue. Women don't tend to get pregnant alone, first of all, on a basic level. And it's very, very important to us at WRRAP that everyone understands that we assist everyone who's pregnant, regardless of how they identify, regardless of their gender, if they're non-binary. We are here for everyone who needs our services, anyone. And on that note, I wanted to ask Julie, in your strategy, you envision a gender equity amendment. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, how that works, and how that would work in red states and how we might come about that?
Yeah, this is so part of what Kitty and I try to do is have sort of immediate, medium, long-term goals. This is definitely a long-term goal of, at least a decade or two before we get here, but it's really an attempt to modernize our Constitution, which our so-called founding fathers, when they drafted it, had some good ideas, but they certainly weren't looking to put gender equity or race equity at the forefront. And so, when you look at how Roe v. Wade is founded in a privacy right and how the Me Too movement is kind of resting on statutory Title VII law, this is really looking at how can we shore up these rights, how can we make sure that they're treated as fundamental rights, and that would be by amending the Constitution to have what we kind of call a supercharged ERA. And it would have language that is much more sort of putting the onus on the government to provide the resources and the rights to people to have gender equity and to get us away from some of these binary stereotypes and assigned gender roles, and really looking at a person's full life experience, the intersectionality of race and gender equity. Getting there is going to take a lot of political reform. It is, amending the Constitution, as we saw with the ERA. You need to get a lot of, vast majority of the states on board, as well as the federal government. But if we don't start thinking, where do we want to go? Where do we want to be? Not 5 years from now or 10 years, but 20 years from now, what do we really need to achieve these rights? We need to start thinking about that now. I know that there's been, a lot of focus around CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which literally all but 4 countries in the world have signed on to. The U.S.
Julie, who are those 4?
I think it's like Somalia and Darfur and maybe South Sudan. I don't even know, and I should, but the U.S. is the one that it's the most awkward and shameful. And
it's not company we should be keeping, to say the least.
And we tend to have this, idea of American exceptionalism in our Constitution and freedom from, and it works in many ways, but in a lot of ways, when we look at basic access to healthcare, basic access to gender equity, the intersectionality of race and gender issues, we fail and we fall down. And, that's why it's so difficult for us to get through even basic coverage for childcare in the latest package from the Biden administration. And we've got to start changing how we talk about it and how we demand it. And hopefully we'll get that, written in ink and in our Constitution before too long.
And you talked in the book about a new and modern and feminist constitutional convention to actually be able to get a gender equity amendment through. Are you seeing energy and activists embracing that kind of an idea?
I would love to. Go ahead, Kitty.
I was going to say not yet, but I think there is some energy going on to try to resurrect the ERA. That is happening in Congress. My problem with that is we have a bad Supreme Court, and they're going to have to rule on whether any effort to bring it back up is legitimate. So given the current court, I don't see that happening over the long term, even if we're successful in Congress. But the strategy we've been talking about will be helpful in the long term to passing a constitutional amendment. Why? Because you have to get the approval of a majority of state legislatures. Okay, so when we say you got to focus on the states right now,
it's for so many reasons.
It's not just to cut back on restrictions or to keep bans from taking effect, but over the long term, it's the way that we need in order to pass a constitutional amendment. The other thing about the states, and I think this is really important, is you don't have to do it all at one time. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right now, the reason the Republicans have so much power in the states is because they have trifectas in the state. What does that mean? They control the House and the Senate and the gubernatorial seat. Mm-hmm. You only need one to block bad laws. Okay. You need all three to pass good ones, but you only need one to block bad laws. So if I had my druthers, we'd be spending a whole lot of money thinking very strategically about how we win some of the gubernatorial seats in the 23 or 24 states that are likely to ban abortion, so that they can veto those laws. Okay,
well,
and we go from there.
We made
and
some.
Let them know why we're doing it. Like we let them know that this is our issue that we're voting on now. I mean, we've had a far right that has very successfully made abortion, banning abortion rights their top priority. And if you look at, Trump's evangelical base, they turned a blind eye to a lot of his sinful conduct, so to speak, because they got their 3 justices. Hats off to them for that, but I think it's really, instead of moaning that and the loss of the court, it's really time to start rallying. And Kitty and I say in the book a lot, do something, pick something that fits for you, bring an ally, work in your community. This is a long-term fight we're engaging in. It has to be something sustainable. Better yet, it has to be something fun, whether it's, signing up for clinic defense. If it's, I think tonight it's very safe to say that fundraising and working with your funds is so effective and meaningful, and can also be a fun way to do it. Getting involved in politics, getting involved in helping people who are traveling. There are a lot of different solutions, and we're really excited for people to get more and more involved. Starting, with this is such a high level of commitment of people who are here tonight and learning about this issue. And our advice would be just keep going.
It's right. You do something. It all adds up. So we've talked a number of times tonight about equity and privilege and who's going to be impacted in which ways. And one of the things that I think Kitty was talking about, that we're in a very different time than we were in the 60s pre-Roe, when women were literally dying on tables from unsafe, illegal abortions. And now we have medical abortion access, prescription medication. But we also have a host of criminal justice measures that are really going after women who are trying to access reproductive health care for themselves, for their daughters. We've seen some really horrifying cases across the country, and it worries me that we're going to see those spike in a post-Roe, a post-Casey world. And we know who our criminal justice system targets. Are there things that we think state legislatures and Congress should be doing now about that from a criminal justice perspective? And are there ways to bring other voices to this movement, understanding the passion that exists around criminal justice reform in this country right now?
Right. I mean, to me, the rogue player is going to be local DAs. That's where we're going to see these efforts initiate. So that the most important thing is, in places where the DA is elected, that there's a commitment not to prosecute women for having abortions or trying to have abortions. And frankly, trying to make sure that any bans that are placed in effect explicitly exempt women from being covered. And that's a great political issue. I mean, make the crazy guys who want to ban abortion vote on the fact that they want to put women in jail.
Yeah. Do you remember that presidential debate question when Trump, the candidate, was asked that, and he said, "Yeah, lock women up," and women went, "You what now?" Yeah. They did not appreciate that idea.
That's an important thing. It's
not right.
We need to vote.
prosecutor isn't that new. I mean, we talk a lot in the book. We tell the story of Rosa Hartford, who was a woman who Kitty defended on criminal charges because she had helped give a ride to a young woman, cross state lines to the nearest abortion clinic. That was maybe 20 years ago now, and we still see it happening in Texas of trying to intimidate and chill anybody who might help people traveling for abortion services, whether by giving them funding or a Lyft or an Uber driver and those kinds of things. So I think you're right, Sandra, that it's the women on the margins who most get wrapped up and swept up into the criminal justice system, whether they're seeking abortion services or even the case of the woman in Oklahoma who had a miscarriage. And keeping an eye on that, spreading the word about those stories, because I think they are really horrifying to a lot of us, and keeping an eye on who your district attorney and who your law enforcement people are, who, this is political soup to nuts.
We saw a prosecution of a woman who took her daughter to the emergency room because she was having a lot of bleeding after taking an abortion pill. And that's normal, but it's scary. And the fact that taking someone to the emergency room could result in criminal prosecution, I mean, that we cannot have this in this country.
Well, it's going to stop the next person from going to the emergency. I mean, Texas is playing Russian roulette with women's lives and health. And, when I was in Ireland, I saw the tragic case of Savita Halappanavar, who had wanted pregnancy and was miscarrying, and her doctors froze. They could still detect a fetal heartbeat, they said, so they wouldn't treat her. They didn't know what to do, and they waited so long that she eventually and tragically died from sepsis. And that became a rallying cry nationwide, as it should. But we're smarter than that. We know we shouldn't have to see a tragedy to know that this is so dangerous what they're doing now.
Yeah. That's right.
The other thing I think that's really important is for us to remember that the law is not all that clear on a lot of questions. Okay, so
which leads to dangerous cautiousness.
Right. I mean, when the Supreme Court reverses Roe and sends the question back to the states, there's going to be a whole lot of things we don't know yet. We won't know how the law is going to treat mailing of abortion pills across state lines. We don't know what the liability is for people who take a pill in Texas if they're self-inducing, et cetera. All of those questions are going to have to take some time to settle down and figure them out. But the important part in all of that is that we can't let this happen in secrecy. Okay, we can't let it happen where people get prosecuted or legislators pass bans or whatever else. We can't let it happen that this is just in secret. We need to bring the light of day to all of these restrictions, and we need to fight back. And one of the things that I think is so critical is that resistance spreads the word. Resistance makes our movement grow. And, I'm at the stage in life, having worked on this issue for 20 years, I want somebody out there making me look reasonable, right? Make me be out there a little bit more radical than me, to make me be the center, because we need that. The right has done that very effectively, and we need to do that as well. So fighting back, resisting loudly, making noise, all of those things are really critical.
Well, Paxton Smith makes us all look quiet and demure and cowardly. I mean, I wish I had that kind of just eloquence and courage, especially at that age. And Sandra, you've been in the spotlight in some really tough ways as well, and I think that sets a model for us of people standing up and getting a lot of support. But it's tough. I mean, it's tough to be on the front lines of clinic defense. It's tough to be a provider and to be public about this. But the more of us that speak out, the more of us that stand up and really say that we are the majority, both in supporting abortion rights as well as maternal health care and a whole host of reproductive freedoms and rights for LGBTQ plus people, the more we create these alliances and allies, the stronger we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been sprinkling questions from the audience in here throughout. So in case any of you thought I sounded intelligent, it was actually our audience who knew all of those things. So don't give me the credit. But we're coming to close to the end of our time here, and I wanted to end on an audience question that I also think is kind of a fun one, which is, I think Julie said it, but it was about Kitty, that Justice Kennedy changed his vote on Casey at the last minute. And I don't know if everyone knows that, and it sounds like there's a little bit of a story there. So can you tell us more about how you saved the day?
Well, I'd love to believe it was my great argument, but it wasn't.
Well, what was it then?
Well, I'm not really sure. What I say in the book is that there may have been a number of factors that changed his point of view. I think most importantly, the way that America reacted to the imminent loss of Roe challenged the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And Justice Kennedy really was very disturbed by the fact that the rule of law would be perceived to turn on who was appointed to the court and how they were appointed to the court. We saw the debates around Justice Thomas only a few months before Casey was argued. And therefore, that type of just real questioning about who should be on the court and what ideology they bring really undermine the rule of law. And I think Justice Kennedy was very concerned about it. In later years, he showed great support for rights around sexuality. He was a real leader on LGBTQ issues. And I think that may also have played a part. But the most important thing, and I think this is really what we need to do today, is we need to register to the American public that taking away settled constitutional rights is not all right. This particular court, the current 5 justices are not going to respond. They're set. They are ideologically beyond belief. But our fighting back will make a difference to other politicians and to all the rest of us who are building a mass movement. So I think that's the lesson of Casey, that fighting back made a difference.
It did, because we all thought it was, we were worried back then. We thought it was done, and it wasn't. So let's hope we get an 11th hour reprieve this time at the court, but I don't think any of us are.
No, then Lancelot is not coming in to save Genevieve on this one. We can save ourselves. We can build back better and stronger. We can really be aggressive about these being our fundamental human rights, and that, we're looking for a different and brighter future, and we're going to support those people who need access to services in the meantime and do what it takes, because the issue is not going away, and it's not going to go just underground and get stigmatized. We're going to rise it up and really show why these rights are so fundamental to everyone.
Well
Sandra,
said,
I just want to make sure that everybody understands that you are really doing the Lord's work by supporting WRRAP and making sure that women have access to good medical care. So I want to thank all of you for being here, because you really are making a difference. Your donations save women's lives, help make a difference. And so that's really a lesson that we need to carry forward.
Thank you, Kitty. Thank you, Julie. And it couldn't be a better segue to the woman who truly, on a daily basis, makes sure that all of your contributions get to the pregnant folks who need them, and has, as I think we all know, really been in the trenches, especially since the Texas law was passed. Sylvia, welcome back to the stage, and I turn it over to you.
Wow, what an amazing evening and discussion. I just want to say WRRAP wants to sincerely thank you, Kathryn and Julie. And even though Emmy was not able to be with us, that's because of technical issues on our part. But she is in the audience listening, and stay tuned for part 2 of this. I also want to thank Sandra Fluke and our audience for being with us tonight, and for all of your thoughtful and engaging questions. Your support and dedication enable us to fund more individuals in need of abortion care. And for those of you here tonight that purchased a ticket, your complimentary book is on its way to the address that you provided us. I do want to mention, as we head into the holidays, please consider purchasing additional copies of Controlling Women and our WRRAP USA bracelets as gifts, and continue to have the conversations about abortion and reproductive rights with those in your circle. You can make those purchases by contacting me at sylvia@wrap.org. And as always, please continue to resist and persist as we continue our fight for reproductive freedom. Thank you again so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.